Welcome back. You're watching The Globe. Incarceration Nations Network is a global network that looks to support, initiate and bring to the fore innovative prison reform and efforts towards reimagining justice around the world. Working globally but always grounded locally, INN looks at the problems whilst striving for solutions focused on systemic change, problems that are associated with mass incarceration. The INN has just launched a Freedom Fellowship that will be housed at its Cape Town hub. And to tell us a little bit more about the network and the fellowship, I'm now joined by INN founder and executive director, Dr. Baz Dresinger. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, tell us about the Incarceration Nations Network. What inspired you to get it going and what are you trying to do?
So INN actually grew out of a book that I wrote, Incarceration Nations, where I looked at prison systems around the globe. And in the context of writing that book, I began connecting with more and more organizations around the world that were doing prison reform work and justice innovation work. And so as a network, I decided to form a network to connect these various organizations around the world who are trying to do things not the same old way, who are looking to reform justice systems, rethink how we do justice. And so I created INN to be a justice innovation network. We have 125 partners in more than 4 countries doing a whole range of work in the space of justice. And we work to amplify and elevate and support our partners as well as to connect them with each other and with the world.
All right, we'll talk a little bit more about those just now. And we probably need an hour to discuss this, but, we don't have time, sadly. But what would you say are the big issues that you have found, particularly on our continent and maybe even in South Africa? I know that a lot of them are similar all over the world, but each continent, each country perhaps has unique issues.
To tell you the truth, the premise of INN is actually that there are more similarities than differences, that the crisis looks vastly similar from one country to the next. So we're talking about an over-reliance on an archaic mode of doing justice, which is what prison is. It's sort of an outdated idea that if you warehouse people away and further traumatize people and then send them back into the world, that somehow magically that will fix crime and that will create safer communities, right? And we know that's not happening. It's not happening in South Africa. It's not happening in much of the world. Prison isn't doing what we allegedly want it to do, which is create safe communities. And so the crisis looks quite similar. There is a crisis of reintegration after prison all over the world, which looks strikingly similar. People being dumped back into communities without support, without access to opportunities. There's a need for educational opportunities for those in prison, for those coming home, the development of restorative justice programs and other alternatives to incarceration. So the idea is that we can learn from each other across borders, we can support each other across borders, and we can really start engaging with the public about what justice, true justice, innovative justice can and should look like.
All right. I think as we're going along, I'm hearing some of the answers of some of my questions, but just to make sure we get them right, what are some of the solutions that you have seen that do work, that are making a difference?
So yes, I did mention some of them. I think some of them are, in essence, Band-Aids and really quite basic, like reintegrative services, housing, jobs, access to education for people coming home from prison. That is vital. Otherwise, you really are creating a revolving door of people who will come home and go right back in or, continue to commit crimes and not build the safer communities. But we're very enthusiastic about systemic change, things like restorative justice programs, diversion programs, shifts in policies, and that refers to things like reintegration policies, discriminatory policies that make it impossible for people to return to their communities after they've been in prison, perhaps drug policies around the world and other kinds of petty offenses that are still on the books, that are clogging systems and keeping people awaiting trial for long periods of time. Certainly access to education. I myself am the founder of a program that offers university education in the US, and there's also one that we have founded in South Africa doing similar work. We know that education is a way to keep people engaged in communities, engaged in the positive work that we want them to be doing in the world. So access to education is another one that crosses borders. So we really focus on what people on the ground are already doing in the space of justice, and how can they do it better, bigger, and in ways that is able to communicate with the general public, so the general public understands that tougher policies are not going to make us safer.
All right, let's talk about this Freedom Fellowship that you've set up. I believe that the inaugural fellows are currently in the country at the moment. Tell us about this initiative.
So this is a very exciting, groundbreaking initiative. There's nothing like it. So we're very, very excited about it at INN, and we're especially excited that it is based here in South Africa. The idea is premised on the notion that those who have the answers to our justice crisis, globally speaking, are the ones who are close to it. The people who have experienced prison, who have come home from prison and become leaders in their communities and are creating justice reform in the context of their lived experience. And so what we are doing is bringing 17 formerly incarcerated leaders from around the world to take up residency in South Africa for 2 weeks and collaborate and build together and be nurtured and supported and inspired by not only each other and the powerful work that all of these individuals are doing in their home countries, but also by South Africa, a country whose legacy is grounded in the work of people who were incarcerated and the movement building that they were able to incredibly, in a world-renowned way, give to society. And so they will be coming here in March. I'm in South Africa currently. They'll be in Cape Town and in Johannesburg, building with each other, seeing many of the famous struggle sites and engaging with the history of this country and really learning from each other and thinking about what, again, always, what does real justice innovation look like, and how do we build the safe, equitable communities that we all want to live in?
All right, you're doing so much work, and one of them we've got to talk about is your docu-series. Tell us about that and what messages are in there and from whom.
So the key word I think you used is messages. Messaging is so important in the work that we do, and that is because oftentimes, even when we have all the data to show whether it's governments or policymakers, what will actually make us safer, if the public doesn't clamor for it, and the public is clamoring for more prisons, more jails, and more tough on crime policies, then that smart justice can't happen. And so reaching the people to understand what builds safe communities, what does a restorative justice look like, what does a good reintegration program look like, is so tremendously important. And of course, documentaries, media, imagery is critical to that. So we made a docu-series that really highlights mass incarceration in a global context and shows us what it looks like, the problems and the solutions in a transnational way. So we highlight issues like incarcerated women, issues like reintegration, again, restorative justice, families, and how families are torn apart and impacted by incarceration. And the entire series is narrated by people who've been in prison themselves. So it's their stories. They are the experts here. And again, that harkens back to our idea with the fellowship, that the experts are the people who have lived experience of the system and bring that wisdom to bear in ways that really benefit us all by making us safer and more just.
Dr. Dresinger, we're going to have to leave it there, but I think we need to talk again, particularly when the fellows arrive, and let's carry on this conversation. Really, really important work that you're doing. Thank you so much for sharing your time and this work with us.
My absolute pleasure, and we would love to come back. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night.
All right, that's Dr. Baz Dresinger, who's the founder and executive director of the Incarceration Nations Network. Fascinating subject about mass incarceration around the world. And statistics show that a good number of people in our prisons are actually not a danger to society. And sadly, the way that our prison system works, we create more vulnerable people that end up committing more crime after the process of incarceration. So we need to really look at that system again.